Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastic Tom Ellis to talk all about Netflix's Lucifer. And one of the things that I love that the show does so deftly is the way that it weaves between tones and genre. And obviously, at the beginning of making the show, you needed to have a little bit more setup to carry the audiences with you. And so now at this point, as you're doing that within singular scenes, I was interested in what the challenges are as a performer and how you're finding so many different elements of tone within a single moment and sometimes even just a few minutes of delivery.
Gosh, it's weird. It feels like we have a shorthand these days. But I think, like, if I go back to when we were shooting the pilot, for example, we played around with the tone of the show because we didn't really know what the tone of the show was going to be. Like, I know that what my take was on it, and Len had his take, who was directing it. And then Fox obviously probably had their expectations as well about what this show was going to be, and so we spent a lot of time. You have a lot longer to shoot a pilot as well, so we would experiment with stuff on the day, and it was really interesting to see what was picked and how that sort of set the tone for how the tone would be set later down the road. Now it's kind of like once you know that you've got people. Once you know that you've got people invested in your characters, then I feel like you can kind of do anything within the boundaries that you've sort of set yourself. And the boundaries of our show are pretty extreme because we know we're talking about heaven and hell and angels and all of those things. We've got this kind of extremity to it already. So working within those boundaries is quite easy. And it offers lots of variety as well. So I think it's important to kind of to work it out and not you can't like if we did an episode or a season 5 episode at the beginning of our show 5 years ago, I don't know if people would have stuck with it. But because you've got to take them on that journey to then find out how much more you can do. So it's we are a very fortunate group of people in that people have really responded to what we're doing. I think the show has always kind of like had a knowingness about itself. It hasn't taken itself too seriously. And that again helps when you're taking these gambles about, what tonally, what are we going to do? But I think, from a performer's side of things, it's very satisfying to make someone laugh, which is a very disarming thing to do. If you can make someone laugh, then you've kind of got them a little bit. And then, without them realizing it, you've hooked them into a kind of storyline they think is ridiculous, but then it has a kind of proper gravity punch to it. And you pull the rug out from under it, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, I'm deeply affected by this. And that's been part of the fun of doing Lucifer, really, because it's got this kind of heart at the center of it. But it's ridiculous most of the time.
But exactly to your point, where you're able to make it larger than life and go to those extremities. If we look at the exploration of Lucifer and God and their relationship dynamic that you had the opportunity to really play around with, fundamentally at its core, despite the fact that, it's not even all just about taking place in Earth and they've had thousands of years to develop this relationship. At the end of the day, it's a son standing in front of his father just wanting his validation and wanting his love. And was that something where you and Dennis were very consciously thinking about, the intimacy and the vulnerability that you wanted to bring into your performance so that it could land those much bigger beats?
It's an interesting one. I remember talking to Dennis when he first started on the show, and like one of my approaches when we first started Lucifer was that I wanted to forget when I was thinking about Lucifer that he was the devil, because I wanted some kind. I have to connect as a performer to this person, and obviously I'm human. Well, I like to think so, and so I can only come at it from that approach, if you know what I mean. So that's why I think our show really resonates with people as well, is because we've got these kind of huge celestial characters, but they're going through very human problems. And a father-son relationship is a relationship that anyone can identify with. And similarly, when we had Trisha playing mum as well, with those dynamics that we played around with, the family dynamic on Lucifer is the thing that people really, really resonate with because they can really associate with it. So I just said to Dennis, we're just father and son. Let's just play it that way. And he was totally on board. I mean, he watched the show anyway, so he knew what he wanted to do. But the lovely thing about working with him was that it was really easy. Like Dennis felt like my dad from the moment that I met him. Now maybe that's because I have a huge amount of respect for him as a performer, and as an actor, and as the president. But I it was not difficult to think of him as my dad, and I think similarly it wasn't difficult for Dennis to think of me as his son. And there were moments when we looked into each other's eyes on the set, and I remember we were rehearsing. The first time we rehearsed I Dreamed a Dream, the scene surrounding that, and I think we both as performers been really looking forward to doing that scene, but I don't think we counted on how much emotion we both kind of stored up, maybe not just in lieu of that scene, but just generally in life, that suddenly it was just unleashed in this first rehearsal. And like we were looking at each other trying to get through our lines, and we were just both sobbing. And because I feel a lot for Lucifer anyway, but I know that that's been the center of his kind of struggle, his relationship with his dad, and just wanting to be loved, and wanting to be accepted. And it just it felt very real when we were doing it.
And I think also it's a lot about where you could take that relationship dynamic with him is all because of the journey that you've taken Lucifer on over this time as well, to the point where when he's actually finally saying to his dad, "Do you love me?" he's able to say it because he's actually in a place where he's emotionally able to hear the answer no matter what it is. And then even when he doesn't get a response to that question at first, he has other emotional outlets that he can channel himself into. And was that something where, when you knew that that beat and that moment was coming up in the script, that you thought about the way in which you needed to emotionally build him into that space? Or did it just naturally flow from everything that you've been constructing into Lucifer already?
Oh, I think it was much more of a natural flow. I think that, the one thing I would say about this whole experience of doing 6 seasons on Lucifer is that the evolution of the character on screen has also been about an evolution of like it's happened naturally off screen as well. It's like it's not something I have to kind of think about too much. It's something that and part of that is because we did so many episodes within the time that we've done it, that I kind of feel like I've been living Lucifer. And like when I'm shooting, I'm never that far away. The difference between Tom and Lucifer is not that much when we're shooting, because I'm just kind of like in it every day. We do long days, I go home, look at the next day's stuff, go to sleep, get up and do it. And it's just like, I spend more time as Lucifer than I do as Tom when we're shooting. So all of those things kind of weirdly feel very kind of natural and organic when they're happening. And this process of like dealing with different people and the different dynamics of different characters, it happens by osmosis, basically.
I also really enjoyed the dynamic that almost has Lucifer regressing a little bit to kind of like some teenagedom, especially when his dad's following him around at work. It's like that thing where teenagers always walk separate to their parents because they don't want anyone to think that they're with each other. And I felt like you really captured that essence of, okay, who was he when he was much younger, and what are the aspects in his personality that his dad's presence in his workplace is drawing out? So how were you mapping out a lot of what you wanted that to look like?
Well, that kind of like, I mean, I thought it was really fun, those moments as well. And like certainly in season 5B, trying to find those moments of fun and really kind of leaning into them was really important, because I knew what was coming up. I knew that this season had sort of quite a heaviness to it as well. So again, it was classic father and son dynamics, really, and like being embarrassed about your dad at work and all those things, and just wanting your dad to be impressed by what you do, and he just doesn't get it, and all those things is something I can totally associate with as Tom. And so it was quite easy just to throw that in. And again, like I think it's really fun that the father and son we're talking about in this particular instance is the God and the devil, and because if people didn't know that about these two and watch that scene, they just think it was a father and son. So it was, it was a lot of fun, but the most fun really was that Dennis was so game for it. And he really embraced the humor of the show, because I don't think he's had a lot of opportunities, particularly to lean into that side of his skills. And he loved it. He relished it. He had such a great time doing the show. And it was like watching someone experiencing what I was experiencing in the first season, which is having fun with a character that doesn't know anything about humanity. and experiencing things for the first time and all that. So it just, I think that that's a rich vein of entertainment for me.
And I love that you were touching upon the musical element in that performance between the two of them. And I know that you've always had such a hand in not just the performance itself, but the arrangement of what these songs in the show are going to look like. And with the musical episode in particular, the intonation and the way that you really focus in your performance on specific lines captures so much. And you really found where there was so much contextualization to add to Lucifer and to add to this family dynamic within the lyrics that already existed. And so what was your journey of really, breaking down the text, breaking down the lyrics and the arrangement and finding the way to bring forth all of that?
Well, I mean, one of the first things we always have to do with the music is that I have to find out how much time we've got, because you've never got time to do a full arrangement of something. So it's a little bit like if you watch American Idol or X Factor, where they have to come up with like a 90-second version of the show that's got a beginning, middle and end, that's got some kind of build. So there was that element to think about. And then for example, with I Dreamed a Dream. Now I'm going to hold my hands up here and say, never watched Les Mis, but I know that song because I know loads of songs from Les Mis, but I've never seen it. So the context of it in Les Mis is kind of like lost on me a little bit, but the context of it in this was easy because I just was, it was very easy to apply what was on the page. It just felt so fitting to the struggle that that I'd been having with my dad. The one that I really am proud of in the musical episode, that in terms of lyrics and just being the right song and at the right time. For years, I've been wanting to do Wicked Game on the show, but it never felt like the right song to do, and it never felt like the right moment. But I always felt like Lucifer falling in love was like a cruel game from his dad. And it was just so brilliantly kind of like the right moment to do it at the beginning of this episode. And we had to kind of write to the Chris Isaak estate about using the song, but also about tweaking the lyrics slightly to make them more poignant for this, and they let us, which was really satisfying.
But that song in particular just feels like it captures every single thing that's been culminating in him as a character for all of these seasons at that moment. And so did you do a lot of rehearsal with yourself? Because like you said, it's a song that you've known for a long time, but you're also bringing it forth in a very different way to the way that you would just play it at home for pleasure. So how did you figure out the nuances and the beats of that performance?
I knew it pretty well. So that's always a good starting point, because then you can play around with it. But I just thought about what it meant to Lucifer. And I thought about Chloe. And just, it comes off the back of the episode where he says, I'm just not capable of love. And he really, started to believe that about himself, that he's not capable of love. Of course, we all know that he is, but he doesn't. And so that's where that came from. With Wicked Game, it's like, I can't believe you've done this to me, Dad. You put this person in my life and I've fallen in love with them, but I can't love. So what a cruel, horrible, wicked game that is. And it ties in with the notion that Lucifer feels taunted by his father and never really understood by his father. So I don't know. It was it's weird. I think quite musically anyway. I'm quite a sort of I'm a musical person, and I grew up with music around me, but it's almost like I never learned another language, but music is my second language. And melody and harmonizing and lyrics, it's just something that I kind of I find it quite easy to apply to something else as well. I could find it easier to make it contextual to what's going on, basically.
Yeah. And the idea of that song and that performance really capturing the essence of the fact that he doesn't feel capable and he doesn't feel worthy of love also transcends into that moment where his dad says to him, the face that you gave yourself in hell and that we still see sometimes is the way that you see yourself. It's not how other people see you. And I've noticed that we start to see that face a lot less as the show progresses and as his emotional journey progresses as well. Was that something where prior to that being in the scripts that there had been conversations about that actually being his self-actualization of himself?
Yeah, I think that really came to the fore, I would say, in season 4. When he had that real struggle with the monster inside of him. And the monster got more than just a face, it just became like a full monster. And Lucifer has a huge problem forgiving himself. It's been sort of dotted around throughout the seasons, there's of course, the episode Monster in season 2, where he eventually showed Linda as Devilface. But I think that, yeah, I mean, for all that time, I think Lucifer didn't know that it was him creating that monster. That monster lived inside of him, and it was about him beating himself up and never forgiving himself. So I think I really sort of started to understand that concept and the self-actualization thing around about season 4. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting kind of concept that the writers threw at us about self-actualization and about angels being able to be whatever they think they are. I think that that's weirdly metaphorical for lots of things in life, actually, and about self-belief and about people's ego and things like that. It's quite an interesting kind of territory.
Yeah. And then I also, jumping back to the music performances, wanted to talk about your piece with Debbie Gibson, because that also, you've talked about how that felt very theatrical, and particularly in the way that that performance came together between the two of you as well. And so how did that shape forth in a way that it felt, much more performative in that theatrical way than the other songs that you did for the episode?
Well, that was the song that musically I struggled with a bit more. Obviously know the song, love the song, but I kind of it didn't feel until we were doing it that I wasn't sure how it was going to work. And then when I saw the staging of it, and when Debbie and I started doing it together, and then the concept of having Dad watching through the observation mirror and all that sort of stuff, it really sort of came together in that moment. So that was a kind of like different approach for me, because some of the lyrics in that song were very obviously very on the nose about him watching me and all of those things, but I didn't know. I think as well because I was performing it with a character that we didn't know from the show, so there was no kind of like real emotional back and forth between the two characters singing the song. However, the person that was watching the song being sung, there was emotion about that person. So it kind of it was a different feeling, and maybe that's why it felt theatrical as well, because it was performed in that small space for an audience in the actual kind of scene. So it was a sort of a standalone in that sense. But I'm so just delighted that Debbie agreed to do it. And I got to tick that box. I get to sing a duet with Debbie Gibson. Thank you very much.
And you got paid for it.
And I got paid for it. Thank you very much.
And diving into talking about Lucifer and Chloe's relationship this season, there's that really wonderful moment where she finally gets introduced to his father, and it's like, this is God. And her first response is like, I really care about this person and you've messed up. And that captured so many elements of the dynamic of their relationship, because it would be easy for it to seem like there's a power imbalance between the two of them. And if anything, it's actually always felt more like Lucifer's the one looking to her for answers. And even as he's on this trajectory of wanting to become and trying to become God, it still doesn't change that between them. And has it been really important to you and Lauren to always manifest and make sure that that is the core of their relationship, that it is always equal? And actually, if anything, that Lucifer sees her as his superior a lot of the times in many ways as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Lauren and I have from day one on the pilot just loved working together. I mean, we really kind of entertain each other throughout the days and try and just kind of lift it as much as we can off the page. And we do, and that had been our MO since the pilot. And again, it's kind of it's one of those things we don't talk about. It's not like we talk about and say, I think you should do this, and I think this is the dynamic. I think it just happens by proxy over time. But we were able to kind of set the tone for that during the shooting of the pilot. And I think, the character of Chloe is so important to the show for so many reasons. Obviously there's the love aspect with Lucifer, but I think the gravity of the show lies in Chloe, and the show only works because of Chloe. And if all these other zany characters just existed and there was no gravity, and this person that kind of was the person that took Lucifer's hand and led him through the journey of humanity, then we wouldn't have a show. So Lauren is very much the unsung hero of Lucifer, and partly because she makes it look so effortless, but she is a key ingredient to the reason the show's been so successful.
Yeah. And as we look at that trajectory this season of him not just going from wanting to become God, but ultimately becoming God at the end of the season, and his reasoning shifting and changing as well, and also reaching a point where he not only thinks that he deserves it in a selfless way, but also knows that he would do a really good job because he actually cares and has the compassion that's necessary for that. And when you look at the history of him as a character, from being someone who was literally banished to hell by his father, reaching this point and knowing that that was where you were building to at the end of 5B, how did you set about taking him on this trajectory where he could land in that place by then?
Journey of selfish to selfless, particularly. I mean, when we started the show, I mean, I didn't really know where we were. I mean, none of us knew how the show was going to end when we first started. But I've always looked at it as a redemption story, like the ultimate redemption story. And if someone is going to be redeemed, then they need to have worked out what it is they've done wrong, and they need to have held themselves accountable a little bit, and gone through all those processes that we all have to do. So. I never knew where this journey was going to end. But the fact it was a journey was something I was very grateful about, because I could have been in a TV show for 6 years with a very stagnant format, and everyone does their thing every week, and they come back and it's all the same again and nothing really happens. And I feel like, even though people have seen this show as a sort of procedural drama sometimes, it's really been a serialized drama about characters, and the procedure has kind of been a way to help us get through, but it's not been what the show has been about. Yeah. So it was a natural evolution for Lucifer, and I feel like by the end of season 5, he'd basically gone like a full revolution.
And then when you were filming those final scenes in the amphitheater, where you've got so many of the cast members, it still just felt like every single moment was distilled down to being about Lucifer and about Chloe and the intimacy of everything that's happening in their relationship dynamic, no matter the scope of everything else that's happening on screen. Was that something that just was naturally there for everybody, and everybody kind of knew that that was going to be the heart and core of those scenes, with that intimacy and the vulnerability that they're sharing with each other? Or did you kind of like figure out what the tone of that was going to be on the day a little bit as well?
I mean, I think inevitably it was going to be about that at some point. It's interesting, that whole sequence in 5B, in the finale, in the amphitheater, was all filmed after we had 6 months off for COVID, and we came back and we had 2 weeks left of season 5 to shoot, and it started there. And we'd had to change how it was because of COVID. And so it's weird how, when you're forced into situations and you do, it's dictated for you by the situation, that you have to kind of like find a way through. And so the version that you got and you guys saw on the screen wasn't originally what was on the paper, and the battle was more epic and involved many more people and all those sort of things, but we had to really distill it down and think our way through it about how can we still make this big and resonate and seem as epic as the rest of the season has been with all these COVID restrictions in place. So if you look back at it now, and now I've told you that, you can look at all these angels like standing behind each other, and they're all 6 feet apart from each other. It's true.
I love it. And then obviously one of the other shifts was that you were all working towards the end of 5B being the culmination of the show as a whole. And then once you were already in the middle of season 5, it got picked up for another season again. And, particularly as a producer on the show as well, and the fact that you've always been very involved in the creative conversations, how did that really help you in terms of figuring out performatively, I was working towards tying up this end, but now I need to leave this a little bit open-ended, or I need to lay the groundwork for somewhere that we're going to go in season 6. Was that hugely beneficial that you were in all the conversations that were happening as it was happening before filming?
I mean, I had to really, when that decision came in about season 6, I had to leave that one to the writers, because I can't really change the trajectory that I was on. So we had to change where the trajectory was going, rather than the actual line itself, or where we cut it off, should I say. So the end of season 5B that you saw was not the original end of season 5B. Mm-hmm. And that was a very much like Joe and Ildy getting together, and we'd very much sort of hatched a plan as to where we were going with 5B, how it was going to finish. We talked for hours and hours, painfully about how do we end this show that we love so much and we love making so much. And that was a really huge conversation. And it went on for weeks. And when we finally kind of like worked out how we were going to do it and was like, yes, that's it. That's how we're going to land. So we're going to stick the landing. This news came in about doing some more, and it was like, oh, okay, right, how do we do that? But I had to leave. I was in the middle of it, so I had to leave that with the writers and just say, you guys work it out, because I didn't want to change anything about what we've been doing, because I thought the story we were telling was great. So it was more about devising as we say in music, a coda, which is like you play a song and then you play it again, but the second time you play it, when you get to a certain point in the song, you skip to a new ending. And that's basically, what season 6 is. It's our coda.
I love it. Can't wait. And then when it comes to playing Michael and Lucifer, you've always talked very extensively about the way that you've crafted them as two very separate characters. But then when you have scenes like in this season where you have Lucifer passing himself off as Michael, do you want to find small, nuanced, minutiae ways which are like the tell and like the slight giveaway if someone's paying attention with a really keen eye? And what are those tiny, minute tells that you layer into your performance?
I mean, yes, is the answer to it, and it's really satisfying to me when people notice them. So I think back to the beginning of season 5, and Lucifer comes back, and then of course we realise it's Michael. It's Michael playing Lucifer. So it's Tom playing Michael playing Lucifer, and I was like, wow, that's a bit of a head fuck. But it kind of it was weird because I feel very comfortable playing Lucifer as Tom. Like it's just like putting a t-shirt on or whatever. It's certainly now at this stage. So I try to kind of like take some of that comfort away. God knows how I did it. I just kind of like, but I did think of it differently, and it's just about, and it's not like I'm going to go, oh, I'm going to do something different physically, because obviously when he was trying to play Lucifer, I wanted the audience to think it was Lucifer for a brief moment, and then of course realize that something isn't quite right. So I don't know. I think it's about self-belief. So if I'm as Tom there, not believing that I'm Lucifer, knowing that I'm Michael playing Lucifer, I know that somehow that's going to kind of transpire somehow, and it won't be like big things, but it'll be tiny little nuances, like you say. And similarly the other way around. I mean, I think I did one scene as Lucifer playing Michael. And that was just, yeah. It was just, I mean, for that one, I just felt like, to be quite honest with you, the entire time that I played Michael on the set of Lucifer, I felt the opposite of what I normally feel when I'm playing Lucifer. I felt very comfortable playing Lucifer. I feel like, in charge, blah, blah, blah. As Michael, I just felt like a huge fraud in front of all of my friends who've been watching me play this other character for years. And I just felt very self-aware, which is not a nice feeling as an actor. So somewhere along those lines, I kind of like used that to my advantage.
And as an actor overall, you obviously have such an effusive love for theatre, and that was where your career initially stemmed from, and a lot of your training as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like when you've played someone for a while, you know him better than everybody else, even the writers. So the writers might write something sometimes like, it just doesn't feel right. Sorry, it just doesn't. Or the way that he says certain things, that doesn't seem right. And I just kind of like, yeah, you do. But and if you're doing a play for a long time, you feel infinitely more comfortable by week 3 than you do in the first week. It's just about finding that character in the first instance. Once you've found them, then you can do whatever you want with them, because you found that character, you know what you're doing with it, and you know how that character responds in any situation.